North, Henderson, and West, and a special hello to East, because last week I didn't have to speak over here, and I got to visit really on a Sunday morning for the very first time over there, so had a great time. The worship team did a phenomenal job. There was a great vibe just in the building overall, and I was especially struck by one lady that I got to talk to out in the lobby. She said, "You know what? You really do look thinner in real life." And I thought that was pretty cool. And so when I come to West, I'm hoping to come to West and visit soon. I'm telling you guys, I told you this before. Let me give you a little heads up again. You know, when you see, let me give you a picture of what I really do look like, apart from the video. We showed this before, but to make sure you're clear on that. So when you see that guy in the lobby, you know, make sure you say hello, because, you know, the cameras do a little bit of tricks. More than anything, we need to shout out to all the fathers today. It's Happy Father's Day. It's one, give it up. Give it up. Tough job getting there to that father thing. No, I am one of your rank. I have 3 kids, and many people around here know this, but not everyone. I kind of went through a rite of passage a little bit as a dad. My oldest, my daughter, got married last Saturday, and so I did the whole walk down the aisle thing and gave my daughter away. And it was one of the most significant moments of my life. It had me reflecting all week. I'm going on and on about my parenting and thinking about things and remembering things. And so here's what I want to do. We are continuing with our series called Faith for Doubters, and we're talking about, ironically enough, hypocrisy today. But I'm going to go ahead and inject analogies from the wedding and from that experience into the sermon. Now, I think it fits, but what I want to ask you guys to do is, even if it doesn't, throw me a little mercy, would you? Okay, I mean, this is a big deal. I raised that kid for 22 years, spent thousands of dollars on our wedding. We're going to get something out of that deal, okay? So if it seems like it doesn't fit, like what in the world is he talking about that for? Just go, get out of jail free card, and just kind of roll with me, okay? Would you do that, please? That would be very, very nice to do. We have been in a series since Easter called Faith for Doubters, and we did the first half of it was faith builders, and we talked about reasons why we should believe this stuff: church, Jesus, God, Bible, the whole deal. And now we're talking about, in June, we're talking about faith barriers. And one of the largest faith barriers that people have is this whole issue of hypocrisy. And I've kind of worded it in a question stated this way: isn't religion really just organized hypocrisy? Organized hypocrisy, meaning that I've heard a lot of people say, maybe you've said this yourself, that you're suspicious of, or you don't believe in what you call organized religion. I've heard a lot of people say that. Of course, I always respond, well, one life, we're disorganized religion. That's but organized religion is something we tend to be suspicious of, and understandably, and maybe there's lots of reasons for it, but I'll bet you, in many ways, it's because of the hypocrisy that you've observed. And I think the hypocrisy runs along 2 lines. Number one, there's what I call institutional hypocrisy. This is the kind of stuff you see in the news. As a matter of fact, I was at a conference, it's been maybe a year ago, and we were talking about church growth and church attendance trends, one of those exciting conferences like that. And they were talking to us about the Boston area, New England, which is a very high Catholic area. And they said that the church trend for attendance, it's gone just slightly down over the years. It kind of does a little bit of this here and there. But about 10 years ago, it did one of these. And it's trying to climb back up. And so social scientists and people who observe these kinds of things, they were wondering naturally what in the world was happening right there. And it didn't take them long to figure out. That is when the news broke about how a number of priests had molested young boys. Adult boys had come out and said, when we were kids, we were sexually abused by priests. And so when that came out, and then the church tried to respond to it, a lot of people didn't appreciate how they responded to it, there was a discernible statistical drop in attendance. Now, I'm not picking on the Catholic Church. I'm just saying that's an example of institutional things. We may not have been affected by it personally, but we read about it in the news, that kind of thing. We heard about it, and it automatically says, I'm not into that. And there's something about, there's an evil anyway, a child molestation, but when you throw religious garb on it, it makes it somehow 100 times worse. Now, the other kind of hypocrisy is what I would label personal hypocrisy. And maybe this is something that some of you have experienced. You didn't read about it in the news. You experienced it personally. We did a series called hurt by church a couple years ago, and I told this story then. I'm going to tell it now because it really did impact me. I had a friend of mine, his biological dad had not been a part of his life, but his mom married this man who became, in effect, his father figure. And that man, he said, made sure they were in church every week. You know, they were there Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. The only thing was, though, and this is from the time he was maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. He said he watched as that man would go into the church building and just be the nicest guy you've ever seen. He would hug and he would pat people on the back and just laugh and smile and carry on, that kind of thing. And he said it was literal. When he got out and sat in the car, he turned into a first-class jerk. And as a little kid, he noticed that. And he said, man, that stuff's not real. Now, maybe some of you, and fathers are awesome, we like to think so, but maybe that's your experience with your own father, and Father's Day is kind of a painful time because you saw that kind of hypocrisy, or you've seen it on other personal levels. You know, here's a principle when it comes to the hypocrisy thing. I maintain that people would rather have you be sincerely corrupt than insincerely righteous. People would rather have you sincerely corrupt than insincerely righteous. A great example of this is Keith Richards. Now, some of you all ought to know who Keith Richards is. He's the lead guitarist for Rolling Stones. He co-wrote with Mick Jagger a number of the hits that they made. If you're a little younger generation, Jack Sparrow, Johnny Depp's character on the whole Pirates of the Caribbean, he says he got that idea of how to deliver him and how he talks from Keith Richards. Okay, so that's Keith Richards to you guys, you young folk, you know. So, but Keith Richards has, for 4 or 5 decades, has had the reputation of living the sex, drug, rock and roll, drug-saturated lifestyle. He's never apologized for it. Everybody knows he's a hedonist, but somehow, even though we don't approve of those things, even though we don't like those things, and we wouldn't say they're right, somehow Keith Richards gets, kind of a free pass on that stuff. Why? Because everybody knows that's just who he is. What you see is what you get. There's not anything phony about him. It's like we'll approve of that. But if you put religious garb around something and you pretend to be righteous and you're really not, people hate that stuff. They've done studies on that. Trust is violated most of all when you're a guy like me and you fail at something that people consider you a moral failure. It has like this double effect. So it's a very, very powerful deal and very important to us, and it can become a real barrier. So we're going to address that very directly this morning, and I've got to the question, isn't religion just organized hypocrisy? I've got 3 answers for you because I only know how to give 3 answers to anything. And the first one is to the question, isn't religion just organized hypocrisy? It's this. Number 1, yes. Sometimes. Guilty as charged. We had a discussion group that we gathered up together before we went to the whole faith barriers thing. We just gathered some people around. They're pretty sharp, and we wanted to hear their input. I didn't want it to be just me, and we talked about the kind of barriers that we were going to be discussing and what would be people's hang-ups, what should we say, what should be the response. And one guy, during the talk about hypocrisy, one of our esteemed colleagues said, you know what, every now and then you just got to give everybody their argument. You just got to say, yeah, that's exactly right. Hypocrisy is real. It happens. Matter of fact, I want you to listen to a passage from the Bible this was written probably around between 50 and 60 A.D., and it was written to a church at a place called Philippi by a guy named Paul, and he says this, quote, in chapter 1, beginning at verse 15, it says this, "It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I'm put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of this I rejoice." In other words, going back 2,000 years, when this thing first started, they had to admit, yep, there are people out there that are doing it for the wrong reasons. They're doing it for money. They're doing it for fame. They're doing it for something other than what is sincere. It's been going on 2,000 years. It will go on for another 2,000 if Jesus doesn't come back by then. And it's just been a part of the package all the way from the beginning. Now, that doesn't make it right, but sometimes all you can say is, yes, it happens. You want to see something that's going to make you mad? Why don't we do that for a while? Wouldn't you like to just get ticked off real quick? I'm going to show you a film clip here, and it's going to tick you off. It's going to be awesome. You're going to be mad, especially Dad's Day. Like, yeah, give me somebody to hit. I want to do that. Give me a gun to shoot, somebody to slap. I don't know. Run into somebody's car. I want to show you something that's going to make you mad. It's going to confirm suspicions. I'm doing this on purpose because you just have to lay it out there. Let me set this up. There's a film clip taken. This is going to be taken from a film that won Best Documentary Award, Academy Award, Best Documentary, but in the year 1972. It goes back a way. That explains the haircuts and the clothing style and kind of the look and feel of the thing. But what's interesting about it, it's called Marjo. And Marjo is about a man who was, by his own admission, a fake, phony, in-it-for-the-money preacher. And his story is that his mom and dad were revivalists back in the heyday of revivals. Revivals back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. They used to set up these big tents, and big charismatic preachers would go in and they'd preach night after night after night. And his mom and dad did that kind of thing. And what they did when he was a little bitty kid, they billed him as the youngest preacher in the world. And at 4, he was ordained. He actually performed a wedding ceremony at 4 years old, which is kind of bizarre. But anyway, they set him up as that, and he grew up in that environment. Then when he became a teenager, he started feeling like this stuff was corrupt. And he even said that his mom and dad abused him into doing it and that kind of stuff. So he drops out. But then when he's in his early 20s, he needs money. He's broke, and he remembers, I know how to preach. I can go out and do these revival meeting stuff, and I can make some money. Not believing any of it, knowing how to do it, knowing how to manipulate people. So he starts doing it again in his 20s. Well, while he's doing it, he does it for a few years, and he starts being conscience-stricken, like, I'm pulling the wool over these people's eyes, I'm being a big phony, I'm going to quit. But before I quit, he grabs a Hollywood camera crew and brings them along with him. And they turned it into the documentary called Marjo. So with that set up, that's the voice you're going to hear, just his reflections on his thing. You'll see images from some of this stuff, and then we'll talk about it. All right, get ready to get upset. This is going to be awesome. All right.
I can't really think of a time that I ever believed in God or and I've ever thought that it was a miracle of God that I preached. I don't think, even with all the people gathering around me, thousands of people saying this has to be a miracle, surely, God has called you and all that. I don't think with all that, I just, knew that I could do it well, and my parents had trained me, but I never really tripped out and thought that I was some real miracle child of any kind.
I think nowadays people see so much happen, they can tell one of these shysters when they come through, because they've heard everything, They'll listen a couple nights, and they won't say anything, but they can tell after a while.
Yeah, they're not dumb. People are intelligent nowadays.
Right.
There's one guy that gets into it so heavy that he prophesies, and he told me how he did it. He sat right, he looked right across the table back and forth at me, and he told me how he confiscates money. He says he's on this station, it's over 40 states, and he'll go on there and he'll get on the radio and he'll say, I know that listening to my little voice tonight, that there's some lady out there and you've got $10 put away in a cookie jar. Now God spoke to my heart and told me to go and tell you to get that $10 and get it in the mail and send it to me, and God will bless you. God will give you a reward such as you have never known before. And then he comes back to me and he tells me, he says, if you're on the radio and you're going over 40 states and you're on at prime time, you've got thousands of people listening, the chances are that there are at least 200 or 300 little old ladies who've got a $10 bill in a cookie jar. And so if you even get, if a couple hundred go over and get it and send it to you, that's $2,000 that you've made just like that. And so, if you're going to get into big time religion, this is the games you've got to play, things like that. You go into it as a business and you work it as a business.
Made you mad, didn't it? Especially if you got a grandma who's got a cookie jar with money in it. Yeah, you do. You're like, I thought so. And hey, does that mean everybody on the radio does that kind of thing? Well, of course not. We're not dumb enough to say that. But at the same time, it's a full-on admission. Those things go on. The Crusades happened. It was a war against the Muslims over control of the Holy Land. How embarrassing is that? It didn't get much worse than that. These kinds of corruptions have happened since the first century. They're out there now. They will happen. They have happened. There's nothing you can say in some sense other than yes. And we're sorry that it's happened. And no one likes it, but it leads us to the second answer to the question is this: isn't religion just organized hypocrisy? First answer is yes. Second answer is no. Aren't you glad I'm nice and wishy-washy for you today? It's no. Listen very carefully. Jesus was the original hypocrisy hater. Jesus was the original hypocrisy hater. That film just a while ago kind of messed with your mind, made you mad. You know who it would make more angry than anybody? It'd be Jesus. As we go through Faith for Doubters, I'm going to give you a recommendation, especially those of you who would label yourselves in the doubting, kind of struggling with this whole thing. You know the Marjos are out there. You know that kind of thing happens. But here's what I highly, highly recommend, just as in your search and your exploration, is that the Bible records 4 different versions, kind of, not versions, but really angles on Jesus' life. They're called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Pick one and just go through it. Read it through. Honestly, true. You don't have to think of it as supernatural or anything like that. Just read it through. That would be my challenge to you. But look for the personality of Jesus, who he is. And it will leap off the pages. He has likes, he has dislikes. He has things that make him happy, things that make him sad, things that make him mad. You can see his personality come through. And what's very, very interesting is that Jesus had this amazing, kind of interesting paradox in his life that his enemies accused of. On one end, he had a lot of compassion for and a lot of patience with the Keith Richards of the world. The people that were authentically corrupt, if you will. The sinners, the tax collectors. His enemies used to point their finger at him that way for that kind of stuff. On the flip side, he would deliver absolutely blistering sermons against those who were fake. He hated it with everything in him. He was a hellfire damnation preacher. Most of the time, it was pointed at the religious leaders and the religious people of his day, those who were considered the best at this kind of stuff, living out the Jewish religion. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read kind of a big block passage, but it's taken from a much larger block in the book of Matthew. Chapter 23, I encourage you to read the whole thing. There's some background that you probably ought to study. We won't have time to go into the background of it, but I want you to listen. We're just going to interrupt one of Jesus' sermons kind of in the middle and just kind of let it play out. Listen to the words that he says and how he says them about these Pharisees who were the leaders of the day. Listen to how he talks. Woe to you, scribes, those were the Bible interpreters basically, and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cummin and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and the dish, and the inside are full of robbery and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and then of the dish, and so the outside of it can also become clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. So you too, listen to this line, outwardly appear righteous to men, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous and say, if we had been living in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partners with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of the guilt of your fathers. And now listen to this. You serpents, you brood of vipers, how will you escape the sentence of hell? Amen? I mean, how would you like to be on the other end of that deal? Coming from the Son of God himself. I mean, it's just like loading up the machine gun, just relentlessly over what? Hypocrisy. He hated it. If you hate hypocrisy, you're in very, very good company. If you hang out with Jesus. That's why we say all the time around here, guys, keep it real, keep it real. I fear it, especially because I'm in the profession that he seemed to hit the most with the baseball bat, you know? Scares me to death, some of this stuff. Because he doesn't like fake, phony stuff. I want to reiterate something that we brought up, because even though he hates it, I mean, why does it happen? It's interesting. His followers When we talked about faith builders, very, very interesting thing. I told you that this whole thing is based upon Jesus and his identity, the Christ, dying on the cross for our sins, rising again from the dead. This was the testimony. And I said that just recently, just within the last 10 or 20 years, even skeptical atheist scholars have changed their tune about their explanation for the resurrection. They still don't believe it actually happened. But they used to say it was legendary stuff. It was kind of the thing that built up over time. Jesus was obviously a great guy, and kind of like people won't let Elvis finally die. They wouldn't let Jesus die. They used to say that. You know what they say now? That they really do believe that the original apostles and original followers of Jesus really did see something. They say it's not the resurrection, but they explain it by either they had hallucinations or they were so overcome with grief that they just kind of saw things. They're explaining that now. You know why? Because they know, and they have to admit, historically speaking, these guys might have been a lot of things, but one thing they were not was hypocrites. They weren't hypocrites. It jumps off the page how authentically they believed it. And even atheist scholars are saying, man, something was driving these guys. They were seeing stuff or whatever because they believed it. I want you to listen to the same writer that we quoted just a while ago, this guy named Paul. He writes in another place a description of his life as a preacher in the first century, where you didn't get a lot of money for doing this kind of stuff. You usually just got pain. Listen to how him describe his life. For what I received, I passed on to you. I'm sorry, it'll be the next one. 2 Corinthians chapter 6. We put no stumbling block in anyone's path, so that our ministry will not be discredited. Rather, as servants of God, we commend ourselves in every way. Listen how they commend themselves. In great endurance, in troubles, hardships, and distresses, in beatings, imprisonments, and riots, in hard work, sleepless nights, and hunger, in purity, understanding, patience, and kindness, in the Holy Spirit and in sincere love, in truthful speech and in the power of God, with the weapons of righteousness in the right hand and in the left, through glory and dishonor, bad report and good report. Here it is, genuine yet regarded as impostors, known yet regarded as unknown, dying and yet we live on, beaten and yet not killed, sorrowful yet always rejoicing, poor yet making many rich, having nothing and yet possessing everything. When scholars now look at descriptions of life that way, they know the original apostles had really virtually nothing to gain from what they were saying. And so they've had to reinterpret that. So the founder hated hypocrisy with a holy hatred. And his immediate followers, they lived it out. Where there's one thing they can't accuse them of is acting a part or faking anything. I think you need to take that into consideration. Yes, it has happened. Yes, it does happen. It might happen personally. It might happen institutionally. But you need to consider the original people and what their lives were really like and weigh that in. Now, I asked this a while ago, but I'm going to ask it again. Okay, well, why does it happen? Let me give you the third answer and final answer to, isn't religion just organized hypocrisy? And my third answer is this: maybe. That's how I sound to my kids when I'm raising them. Yes, no, maybe, I don't know. Leave me alone. Maybe. But sometimes it's just weakness. Maybe. But sometimes it's just weakness. Now, this is where I'm going to attempt tell you a little bit about the wedding thing. I won't promise not to bore you with wedding pictures and that kind of stuff, but because I probably will. I'll be guilty of that. Okay, we went through this. I raised this kid for 22 years, spent thousands of dollars in this wedding. I'm going to get something out of this deal, sermons or whatever else. I want to show you a picture that a friend of mine has snapped, and that was taken at Audubon Park. That is myself with my daughter. I wish you could see it a little bit better. It was very cool. There was a giant eraser on the grounds there. There was kind of an interesting kind of add-on. But that moment that was taken, this isn't one of the official photographs, just a friend of mine snapped on his iPhone. That moment was arguably one of the most significantly meaningful moments I have ever experienced in my life, for all kinds of reasons that I won't bore you with. It was layered with all kinds of stuff, and mainly because I'm walking with someone that I've known since the ultrasound pictures. I mean, that goes back a ways. I was the first one to hold her. My wife's labor had been so difficult that she didn't get to hold her first. I got to hold her first. I remember looking down on the table and seeing, the first thing I noticed about her, among all the goopy stuff, was the shock of blonde hair. Boom. I thought, ooh, how weird is that? We both have brown hair. And I remember at that moment falling so head over heels in love. I mean, there's romantic love, there's all those things, but it was the kind of love, and dads, I'm sure you can relate. Overwhelming. Whoa, this is crazy. I mean, I'm a big baby about that stuff, emotional guy. I just started weeping, just crying, and I remember picking up that child, and you had having this rush, just a rush of love and passion for her, and thinking in my mind, oh man, you have been born to super dad. I'm going to be the greatest dad who ever lived in the history of dads. I guarantee you, I promise. Oh, I mean, you're just filled with it. You long to be. Anything that you need, I will be there for you. Now, let me give you a couple lessons, just kind of in asides, Dad. When you come to that moment, first of all, that moment was going through my head while I was walking down the aisle. Learned a couple things about those moments, just again as an aside. I'll come back to this in just a moment. One, it was a significant moment because my daughter and I are extremely close. And I was able to whisper something in her ear that meant something a lot to her, and I knew what it meant, and she knew what it meant. And the other thing was, at the other end of that walk, I believed in the guy who was waiting there in his tux. And a little bit of advice, and a lot of you have the little ones. If you don't believe in the guy at the other end in his tux, just walk somewhere else. I ain't kidding, man. So, you don't have to take that. I'm kidding, not kidding. I don't have to make that walk. That whole deal. Also, I wanted you to get a good look at that picture because your turn's coming. Y'all with daughters. But anyway, I remember that day, and you know what that's like as a dad. And you know the promises you make and the feelings that you have. But you know what? I was driving just kind of in a neighborhood recently, and there was obviously a dad sitting on his riding lawnmower, and like a 4-year-old kid standing there. And he was just barking at this 4-year-old. I mean, just barking at it. Just, the kid's just standing there, And boy, I thought, man, that sure does look unattractive. And about the time I picked up a rock in my mind to say, hey! I remembered all the times that I had acted that exact way. Even though I'm going to be super dad, little one. I'm going to be super, but I confess the first day we ever started, 10-10-10. One of my deepest regrets is how many times in the way in which I lost my temper with my children. Never got physically abusive and everything, but sometimes you walk away and you go, who in the heck are you? And I would, in effect, say, I don't care if I live to be 95, I never, ever, ever want to do that again as long as I live, and then I find myself doing it again. And please don't get me wrong, that don't make it okay. But what it does for everyone, yes, we can admit there's hypocrisy out there, and we follow the one who hated it more than anything. But sometimes, and maybe you can relate, it is possible to believe something profoundly and want it deeply and just screw it up. Just flat out screw it up. And hate yourself for screwing it up. And it doesn't make it okay, but it at least makes it explainable, if you will. And I was so thankful when I walked down that aisle that all those times that I regret, just, that somehow mercy and God gave us grace, that we had a great relationship, and it was a wonderful moment, and we're together. And later on that night, she wrote me just a beautiful text. And somehow I didn't get to be super dad, but I got to be pretty good dad. Put that on my shirt, BGD, What a title, So let's apply it. First of all, doubters. Those of you who doubt, struggle, the hypocrisy thing, institutional, personal. Hey, first thing we got to say is, happened. Happens. No one can excuse it. It's just there. It's real. You've seen it. You know it. All anyone can say is, you got a point there, and that was dumb, and it shouldn't have happened. The second thing, though, is you got to know the originators of this were the real deal. They really, truly were. They might have been a lot of things. You can call them religious freaks. You can call them whatever you want. But you cannot call them hypocrites, historically or otherwise. You can't. That is not there. But the third thing is, you got to remember, sometimes when you see one of us that claims to believe it, and we don't live like it at all, there really was moments, though, when there's been times that I've had with God that I think, man, there's no way I can walk away from this worship moment and almost never sin again. It felt that way. I was so full and so believing and so, yes. And then, my wife, there was a thing called Promise Keepers. Maybe you've heard of this. Promise Keepers thing. So one of the greatest, I went to a 1,000,000-man worship service in Washington, D.C. All men singing hymns. I mean, we were on our knees. We were crying out. We were crying. We were hugging. We were doing the whole deal. It was awesome. And my wife, I love her crack. She goes, you are nice for like a good 3 days after those things. And I am. But I feel like I can never be a jerk again, but somehow I manage. Believers, let's apply it to us. First of all, your only defense when you're talking to people, they bring up stuff like priest or Protestant, whatever. You just say, yeah, you got a point. But we're following the original hypocrisy hater, and that's why I'd say, we say keep it real a lot around here. That's not a cute little phrase. That's a challenge, because I really do, in Jesus, I fear as much from him. Hypocrisy. Even smelling like it a little bit, because man, he was patient with a lot of stuff. He didn't seem very patient with that one. But thirdly, we all are weak, and it's a reminder. Remember, this whole series has been around the things, all right? Jesus' identity, his death on the cross for our sins. And it's not just to get you in the door. It's what keeps you in the door. It's what keeps you breathing is the cross. The cross is not the beginning stages, it's the whole thing. The resurrection is the reason we're in. And so there never should be one whiff of hypocrisy or whiff of pride in any church anywhere. Because the only way we got in there was to be died for. And finally, I'm just going to, because it's Father's Day, dads, besides walking away with that daughter, if you don't like what you see at the other end of that aisle, just walk away. I know you're going to fail as a dad. Sometimes you just got to admit it. I think the only thing I did right whenever that happens is I go to my kids and say, that wasn't right. How I acted was wrong. And then you got to hate hypocrisy in yourself. Don't allow yourself to walk in a church building and pat people on the back and hug them and smile and go home and be a first-class jerk. Don't take that from yourself. It's wrong. And little kids watch it. They're not stupid. And when you do fall, which you will, just go and be real about it. And remember, third thing, dads, we're weak. But that's what the cross is for. That's what the cross is all about. And you can teach your kids how forgiveness works and how grace works. So let's be that way and be the real deal. Let's pray. Father, thank you very much for life, for goodness, for mercy, for fathers. Thank you for the privilege of getting to wear a title that you yourself have given to us to refer to you by analogy. Forgive us when we don't reflect you to our children, because you know it. You see what goes on behind closed doors, and we're mowing the lawn and just acting like we shouldn't. Lord, don't excuse us, fill us. But Lord, I pray to love the cross more than ever. Lord, I pray to embrace the resurrection more than ever, because it's the source of life. Lord, help all our doubters to be healed. Some people are out there at both campuses here in Henderson. They're struggling because they saw some really ugly stuff growing up. All their suspicions were confirmed, but may they know that you're the real deal, and there are the real deal around. So Lord, help us all. We thank you for who you are, for what you do. In Jesus' name.